Okay, all right, it looks like, am I recording right now?
Yes, you are.
Okay, perfect. Okay, well, I guess I wanted to talk about some of the items on the syllabus. In general, I've sent out an email to students and they should have gotten the link to the OneNote in case they enrolled late. There's also this information on Canvas. If you just look at the oldest assignment, I've updated it where it has like a more recognizable heading where I think it's called course info. If you prefer to find this stuff via Canvas instead of email, it's there. I've also decided to update the homework date. I just decided this last night as I was thinking about some of the things that were involved in doing this assignment. I'm giving you guys an extra week, and the idea is this. It's going to be Friday. It's going to be due Friday, October 23rd at 11:59 p.m. And that's basically just to give you guys more time with the assignment. But there is a little bit of a grading rubric on the assignment itself. There are 8 points awarded for the assignment. Each of the things that I've kind of mentioned as having a certain number of points, 1 point each in this case, pertain to what you have to turn in. So make sure you do those things. When you do embed these screenshots, you need explanations for what you've actually submitted. If the explanation is, it's somewhat self-explanatory, you don't have to explain as much. Like for instance, you don't really have to explain about the track submission link. There's nothing really to talk about there, but for the drum pattern you've made, you could kind of describe the stylistic approach that you had, or any kind of interesting approaches or even stumbling blocks that you've had along the way, just to give us all more context. I guess explanations can be a few sentences in length, but you could also be more elaborate as well. It's really your prerogative. It's really just to help us gauge what you're doing, but you need a minimum so that we can kind of get some sense for what you've done just by looking at the screenshots. And so the points will be awarded on a pass-fail basis. It's pretty simple to get the points. Like you just include the thing, the screenshot, and you just explain. And you should get 100% on your assignment if you just follow the directions. If you do have any questions, you could always email one of us. And it's very helpful when you do, because I love it when people email me, because oftentimes your questions are like questions a lot of other students have, and you kind of cause a class email to go into effect. So that's basically what I had to say about the homework. It will be on Canvas and in the form of a discussion thread and a homework assignment. That stay tuned on that. That's going to come on really soon. The other thing that I wanted to tell you about was there's just a couple of things. Oh yeah, I guess I didn't tell you about the late policy. So for each day that you submit the assignment late, basically if you take more than 24, if you are 1 minute late, like past the 11:59 or the midnight deadline, you lose 10% of the total possible points that you could be awarded for that assignment. And that extends up till 24 hours past the assignment date. So if we're talking about 11:59 p.m., you have until 11:59 p.m. the following day to not lose more than 10% of your grade. And then if you submit 24 hours after that, you'll lose another 10%. And just for the sanity of our TAs, we won't accept homework that is more than 2 days late. So you have to submit within the 2-day window if you want to turn something in late. Just be aware that there will be a deduction. There is also this "shh, it happens" clause. which basically allows you one free homework extension if you communicate with your TA ahead of time. You can request a 5-day extension. You can only play this card once in the quarter. If you are going through long-term health or other issues, we definitely can be more flexible, and that we'll kind of handle those on a case-by-case basis. But I guess the moral of the story is just be as communicative as you can be, and good things will happen. If you've tuned into this class late, I just want to ease your concerns about participation. Basically, if you can come to class synchronously, you should come to class. It kind of helps the engagement. Like we do in-class activities. If we were not in a pandemic, we would definitely be in class, and there would be no option to not be in class. So, but I understand that some people are in different time zones and they can't necessarily come to class on a consistent basis. For those individuals, don't fear, like when we're talking about participation, you basically engage the constructive criticism on your fellow classmates' works through a discussion forum on Canvas, and you could do that asynchronously. So that's basically, hopefully that will allay some of your fears. And as far as the grading breakdown is concerned, this is the grading breakdown. I think it's pretty much the university policy that I guess I will say that if you do have exactly, I think the only thing I would change about this, if you have a 90.0%, that would be an A-. But if I would suggest you're not that much on the cusp, but this is the general grading breakdown. So if there are any questions about this, I'll try to update that to reflect it. But yeah, just some housekeeping stuff regarding the syllabus and grading. Yeah, if there are no questions about that at this moment, I can just proceed on with the lecture. Okay, I guess now is the time to proceed on with the lecture. So last time we talked about creating a drum beat, and I guess it is probably a good idea just to kind of go over that one more time. Just quickly, we'll just create a new drum beat. And just to kind of go over this process, what I do is in my browser, I go to the drums section. In the case of, I'm creating a MIDI pattern, right? And, excuse me, I choose a particular drum kit that serves my fancy. I have to make sure my audio is playing. This probably won't happen to you, but this is happening to me because of I'm the Zoom host. You can kind of preview some of these sounds. 808 startup kit. Okay, well, maybe the 909 flavor kit, right? I could take this device and there's two ways I can kind of put this on a track. For one, we've talked about the way to just create a track. And there's two different types of tracks. There's an audio track and a MIDI track. And since this particular drum kit is creating MIDI data, you need a MIDI track. So, sorry, the top menu bar of my computer is, I don't know if you can see that I'm struggling with this. Where is it? Oh, there it is. Okay, cool. I'm going to create a MIDI track. And once I create a MIDI track, I think it's a good idea just to kind of name it something. So I'm going to name it, I'm going to right click and rename it my drums. And now what I can do is I could take this drum kit and just drag it right on this MIDI track. And voila, you have basically a MIDI track with an instrument that you could play. So that's a good thing. At this point, we want to actually create a pattern. So what we have to do is we have to create a MIDI clip. And in case you've forgotten how to create a MIDI clip, I do want to point out that in the OneNote, if you go to MIDI clips, there's a step-by-step process on how to do this. So if you select a particular region in the MIDI track and you right-click it and you click Insert MIDI Clip, you will create a MIDI clip. Because right now you just have a device, but you don't have any sheet music. So it's like you have a piano without any notes to play. So what you got to do is you got to actually create the notes. So you right-click the particular region in the track, and you click Insert MIDI Clip, and voila, you have a piano roll editor. And we're going to talk more about this later today. We're going to talk a little bit about music theory today, actually. There's a lot to say about that, which is precisely why I decided to push back the assignment a week. But anyway, I have a mechanism for inputting MIDI notes now. I've got this MIDI grid where I could just create notes at any given point. And if you are unfamiliar with how to create MIDI notes, again, that's on the OneNote as well. You just double click on one of the grid squares to create a MIDI note. And I guess one thing that I haven't told you about is this pencil tool. If you use the pencil tool, which incidentally, if you press B in Ableton, it'll engage the pencil tool. So check out where my mouse is. If I press B, there it is. And what this is actually the draw tool. And what the draw tool allows you to do is it allows you to not double click. So you can actually do things like this and just kind of create swaths of notes very quickly without having to fidget with anything. It just allows you to create notes on the, as long as you're holding the mouse down, it only allows you to create notes on the particular pitch that you've selected. In this case, like I'm on the tom drum pitch. But you know, this is cool if you want to do like a repeated pattern, if you want to just put in a bunch of hi-hats. I think we've talked about this. This is kind of an effective thing to do, right? I can always turn off the draw mode switch by pressing B, and at that point I can go back to my simple double click method. We've talked about what these numbers at the top mean. These just basically refer to the transport position. So basically like the beat position that you're on. So I should add a section about this on the OneNote. I will do that. So this is measure 1. This is beat 2 of measure 1, beat 3 of measure 1, beat 4 of measure 1, measure 2, beat 2 of measure 2, beat 3 of measure 3. And if we hear a metronome, let's just hear a metronome, and I'll add a slide about this too. Whoops. Let me actually turn off the sound so you can just hear the metronome. 2, 3, 4. Measure 2, 2, 3. Measure 3, 2, measure 4, 2. Right? So this kind of organizes our rhythmic information. That's all it's doing. So this is useful to know how to interpret this so that you could have the right spacing of information. Incidentally, I've talked about, I think I have on this MIDI notes section, the way that you increase the resolution of the grid squares. You could press Command 1 to increase the resolution and Command 2 to decrease. So just to recap on that, notice how things are getting more resolute. Well, no, that's not the correct usage of that word. Things are getting more, how do I say? Things are getting, yeah, the resolution is getting finer. Whereas if I zoom out, the resolution is getting coarser. You can see how there's more, if I'm pressing Command 1, more stuff is, more subdivisions are appearing. But if I press Command 2, less subdivisions appear. Incidentally, if you ever forget these shortcuts, you can right-click in the MIDI clip, and you could actually change the subdivisions. So this is useful. So if you just right-click on the MIDI grid, this is something I just saw one of my teachers do. And I was like, oh, this is an alternative way of doing this. You just right-click, and you can select the grid resolution. So if I right-click the grid and I select 1/4, that means the grid resolution is now in quarter notes. Incidentally, if you're ever confused about what grid resolution you're in, you can look at the bottom right-hand corner and you can see that indeed we are dealing with quarter notes. You see this 1/4. I hope you can see this. Sometimes Zoom blocks things. Yes?
Nakul, maybe you could explain what is a quarter note?
Yes, what is a quarter note? Let's see. Maybe I'll jump to the one series really quickly.
If you're going to get to it later, that's fine. But I just, beats, measures, quarter notes, where there's a lot of terminology that not necessarily everyone will understand.
Yes, absolutely. I need to add this to the theory section, actually. Okay, so I guess here's a little rhythmic pyramid of notes. And I have to, this is from another class I taught, so this is not on the OneNote, but I'll see if I can incorporate this. But basically, if you have a whole note, basically that occupies an entire measure of musical information. So I guess a measure of music is a subdivision in itself. It's like you're breaking up the rhythmic patterns into, you start out with larger subdivisions of time, and then you gradually, you can subdivide those larger subdivisions into smaller amount of subdivisions. So traditionally, a whole note takes up an entire measure of music. In a certain time signature, it does. That's an oversimplification, but I guess just go with it for now. So a whole note can usually take up an entire measure of music. A half note, you could subdivide a whole note into two half notes. You can actually subdivide a half note into quarter notes. Each half note can be subdivided into two quarter notes. Each quarter note can be subdivided into eighth notes. And each eighth note can be subdivided into 16th notes. And this, you can see how this can just go on forever. You could actually subdivide 16th notes into 32nd notes, 32nd notes into 64th notes. So how does this relate to the grid in Ableton? Well, let's actually simplify this. And let's just look at this. So what I'm claiming, let me move your windows a little bit to the side. What I'm claiming here is that, let me just expose one measure. So I'm claiming that this entire thing is one measure, okay? So when I see this, when I go to 1/1, the note will take up the entire measure, okay? So every time I enter a note, it takes up the entire measure. So the analog to that is this whole note. Basically, I'm inputting whole notes. If I change the grid resolution to 1/2, basically this means half notes. So every note that I input, there will be two of them that fit into the measure, okay? Can you guys see that, right? There's 1 and 2, right? Going along with this, if I change my grid resolution to quarter notes, there will be 4 slots in which to fill in. There's 4 subdivisions of this measure, okay? Okay. In fact, there's 4 subdivisions of this whole note, but in this case, the measure is the whole note, the same amount of length as the whole note. So if I do this further and further, 1/8 represents eighth notes, right? So now there's 8 subdivisions, right, of time. If I go even further, whoops, sorry, going the wrong way. 16th notes, there will be 16 subdivisions, right? So it's just basically you're taking it has to do with the spacing of events. Like you're basically, you could start with a larger unit of time and you could go into smaller units of time. So like for instance, a whole note in Ableton is represented by 1/1. Half note in Ableton's grid is represented by 1/2. Quarter note is represented by 1/4. An eighth is represented by 1/8. Basically, you're taking this particular, you're taking a measure of, an easy way to think about it is you're taking a measure with a whole note in it, and you're subdividing that whole note into 16 constituent parts. So that's what this grid represents. You could subdivide the rhythmic information. I hope that makes sense. There's a lot more I could say about that. Rhythm is this class is a little bit of a can of worms from the standpoint that music theory can rear its beautiful or ugly head depending on how you feel about it at times. So if you're ever at all confused, just don't feel free to ask about anything. So hopefully that makes sense. So I guess in the context of making a beat, if I'm over here in the arrangement grid, I can see at the very top these numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4. These all represent the measures, right? So the idea is if you have a piece of, in traditional music theory, well, I shouldn't say that. In Western music notation, you see, you might have seen something like this before, right? And you see like different boxes of music, right? Each of these different boxes of music is a different measure in the music, okay? So this is measure 1, this is measure 2, this is measure 3, measure 4, measure 5, right, etc. Each one of these measures has the same number of beats, which is given by this top number. But anyway, without needing to know about that, just know that all of these measures have the same amount of time within them, okay? So how does this correspond in Ableton? Well, in Ableton, this number right here, 1, represents the first measure. So this little unit of time represents this measure right here, right? Whereas in Ableton, if I go to measure 2, this represents this measure of music, okay? Correspondingly, if I go to measure 3 in Ableton, if you're familiar with music notation, it represents that, okay? Okay, so you're basically subdividing a piece of music into measures. I guess that's the first place you start. If you like zoom out, you'll see that, oh, I might have 57 measures in this song, and it takes 1 minute and 45 seconds for the song, for the song's length, right? So at first, I guess like the most broad way of subdividing is just to subdivide the entire piece of music into measures, okay? But then the idea is you could subdivide each measure into smaller subdivisions. So that's what these other numbers mean. So right now you just see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But if you zoom in a little bit, notice how you see 1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, right? What you're actually seeing is what this is referring to is this is what it's referring to. I'll show you in 1 sec. Okay, so right here, oh, I changed my engraving rules. Whoops. Okay, let me just add some measure numbers. Okay, so this is measure 1, this is measure 2, this is measure 3, this is measure 4, right? So if I were to, right, in this particular measure, I have 1 whole note, right? In this particular measure, I have another whole note. I continue having 1 whole note per measure. In Ableton, that might look like this. Let me create a MIDI clip. So in this particular case, in music notation, I have 4 measures, okay? So in Ableton, I'm going to create 4 measures of music. I'm going to select 4 measures, 1, 2, 3, 4 measures. I'm going to create a MIDI clip. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my grid resolution to be whole notes. Whoops. And what I have here is basically right. What I have here is basically the same, very similar to what I have here, right? I've got 4 measures of music: 1 measure, 2 measures, 3 measures, 4 measures. And each note in that measure takes up the entire measure, right? But if I wanted to, I could zoom in a little bit, and you'll see that I could expose things on the grid. Like I could actually put something on beat 2 of the measure, right? So I could do something like this. So each measure, I'm putting in 4 beats, okay? And they're actually quarter note beats because it's 1/4, right? Right? So the way that would look here, right? It's just basically each measure has 4 quarter note beats. And this is, if you're familiar with, I guess, Western music theory, or you've practiced classical music before, you're probably familiar with this. But I guess if you've never done that before, it's not that you don't have to think too hard about it. It's just basically you have a unit of time. You're just subdividing that unit of time into smaller units of time, and you can jurisdict what subdivisions you're using by selecting the grid resolution. So I guess this representation right here roughly corresponds with what I have over here. Okay. Okay. And I will add more stuff to the OneNote about this just to kind of tie the bow on this. And for those who could use a little bit more assistance on this, I'm always happy to help. But anyway, we have a drum pattern that we could create. And in this case, the drum pattern is 4 measures in length, okay? And I think I've told you this before, but a good strategy that we could use is we could alternate the kick drum and the snare drum on, in fact, a good strategy is to do this on quarter note beats. So a kick on the first quarter note, a snare on the second quarter note, a kick on the third quarter note, a snare on the fourth quarter note, right? Right? Classic, right? Another strategy in techno, what they often do is this thing called 4 on the floor, where they just have a kick drum on every single beat. 4 on the floor refers to this idea that there's 4 quarter notes in every measure, and there's a kick drum playing on every single one of those beats. Right? Anyone feel like going to the club right now? So anyway, this is another thing that you can do. You could have kicks on every single quarter note, right? But then you could have a snare on every other quarter note. And the drum patterns, if you're looking at the drum pattern book, you'll find that a lot of the drum patterns roughly follow patterns like this, because this is a very common pattern. Right? Pretty simple pattern. So another thing that we can do is just add some hi-hats. So let me use my pencil tool. Put in some hi-hats. You know what? Let me actually increase the grid resolution. Whoops, that's Tom's. Right? A very simple but effective beat. Let's see. So I guess the moral of the story is you could figure out how to do this by looking at the drum pattern book. So for instance, let me get back to our OneNote. 6, okay. And if I go to resources and I go to drum machine patterns, they both show you the notation and they show you the actual the grid resolution. So I know we've just very quickly gone through this, but this is a quarter note. These are 16th notes. This is, I mean, this information we put up if it helps you. I think it is helpful actually. If you don't know what proportion, if you don't know what duration to make the notes, you might end up with something like this. Like you might proportionally get everything correct, but it might look like this. You're like, why does it sound so fast, or even worse? Right? So you might find that, oh, I have all the right proportions, but what's wrong? What am I doing wrong? It's that you didn't, it's just that the note lengths are wrong. So you can actually scale everything up by selecting everything and just messing around with this divide by 2 and multiply by 2, which just basically multiplies the duration by 2 or divides the durations by 2. So now it's still a little fast. If I want it to be really slow, I can divide it again. All right. Okay. Hopefully that was a good refresher on this stuff. Okay, so you have drums, but what next? What next? There's a lot of other stuff to deal with. So I'm going to open up this music theory tab. I was up last night making a lot of this stuff, but let's go on to instrumentation. You might wonder, well, what else do I add? Because on the homework assignment, you're asked to add another MIDI instrument of sorts, right? So let's just talk about some basic instrumentation that a lot of music has, okay? It often has some bass instrument, some chordal instruments, melodic instruments, some drums, and some effects. This is a very simple way to, this is a way to simplify what a lot of music, popular music especially, incorporates. And actually, I have slides on how to actually access these particular sounds. So for instance, if you want a bass sound, what you can do is you can go to the browser, you can click sounds, and you can click bass. And the bass is important because it kind of gives you the low end that you expect in a track. Like if you don't have any low end in a track, it doesn't really give you that kind of thump that you want. Like when you're at a club and you hear the low end, it just kind of hits your soul. It like literally makes your whole body vibrate. So you need some low end in your track, and bass is really good for that. So if you're trying to incorporate bass into your track, it's very simple. All you have to do is go to the browser, go to sounds, go to bass, okay? And then you'll see all of these basses, and you'll see a different amount. You'll see different basses on yours, but you should actually see. You could go to sounds, but you could, I guess you could go to sounds, and you'll see different basses. So I'll just drag this little bass into my track. So there's two ways. I could, again, the classic way is to create MIDI track, rename the track. And I never told you about the second way. The second way is just to drag it into an empty slot. Right here, it says drop files and devices here. If you drag it here, it automatically creates a track and names it for you. So just to do that one more time, I'm dragging something from the browser, and then bam, it goes right here. And there you have it, right? Now I have a bass, okay? Okay, so now I want to create a bass line to go with this drum pattern, okay? I'm going to do something really, really simple. I'm going to create a MIDI clip. And I'm just going to have one note, not the one note that our class is referring to. Okay, it's just one single note. multiply this back by 2. You can see how it already gives the track a lot more dimension, right? Just by adding that one note. And again, I'm not talking about this one note, but just by adding this one note, it's really, it fills in the entire sound. So we'll talk about note choices because there's a lot I have to say about this. In the past, when I've taught classes like this, there's always, it inevitably turns into a discussion on music theory at some point. So I want to give you the most basic understanding of music theory to kind of get you started. But all you have to know is that one note can take you a long way because pieces of music are often centered around one note. Like a lot of popular music around the world, in fact, there's kind of a home base centered around a single note. That's why a lot of pieces of music start and end on the same note, because you kind of return to that note to kind of signify that you've completed the journey and that you've it's a happy ending. Okay, so very simple. I've added a bass track. I've just put one note on this particular track, and already I've satisfied half of the assignment. Because remember, if we look back at the assignment, if I go to class info and I go to homework 1, we need to make a drum pattern. Well, we've made a drum pattern. There's this little discussion on what MIDI, that the fact that this is MIDI data, but you also have to include some other MIDI data. Okay, so you have some MIDI data. We haven't talked about audio samples in more detail yet, but we will. We're on kind of we've talked a little bit about the favorites bar. And we're going to talk about automation next week. But anyway, this is already taking you a long way in terms of your assignment, just by laying this down. And you can see how it's kind of an effective start to a track, right? But if you were to get a little bit, go a little further on this journey, there are some nuggets on other types of instruments you can incorporate into your track. There are chordal instruments like pianos and guitars that traditionally kind of fill in the mid-range of the frequency spectrum. So like the bass kind of hangs out in the lower range. The drums kind of hang out all across the range. And the chordal instruments in a group band context, like pianos and guitars, when you're playing in a band, oftentimes they kind of fill in the middle range. Okay, so how do we create such an instrument? There's two types of chordal instruments, by the way, families, I guess you could say. There are rhythmic kind of instruments, like a rhythmic guitar, waka 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 waka, right, or like but like something really percussive, right, like staccato on a piano, for instance. Short and snappy, like a lot of rhythmic instruments have that. Like that's why they, like, you might have heard that they call a piano a percussive instrument, because you can kind of play with a lot of rhythmic vigor and you can kind of do things like that. I'll demonstrate, but there are certain places in the browser that you could quickly find sounds that kind of satisfy that kind of sonic family. Then there are kind of textural chordal instruments that are kind of have a sustained quality. Like if you imagine, you just hold down a note on, like, I guess I'll demonstrate this for you. So what I'll do is I will go to the browser, I'll go to sounds, and I'll go to piano and keys. That's one of the places I suggest that you look at. And all of these are kind of going to be rhythmic, or these are all going to be chordal instruments where I can play multiple notes at the same time. And that's important to know what a chord is, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So I'm going to drag this electric piano days. It's already in my favorites, by the way. You can see that. It's right there. Right, I'm going to drag this over here. And what I have here, sorry, the latency when I turn on Zoom is really bad. So like everything I play is just feels like a second after I've played it. So I make more mistakes than I normally do. But it's a good exercise in how to fix errors. So anyway, so for example, this is sort of has a snappy kind of quality, right? But if I lay down, right, it has kind of sustained quality, right? So like you could do both things. It kind of depends on what you want to do. It's just if you hold the notes down, it has sustained quality. But if you don't, right, it has a kind of a snappier staccato quality, right? So what you could do is experiment with both. A lot of these instruments, these instruments in this section accommodate both kinds of playing. This instrument is one example of that. So what I'll do is I'll create a MIDI clip. I'll right click and I'll click Insert MIDI clip. And I'll just jam along with this. And again, there's going to be a lot of latency, which is going to bug me, but it is what it is. I'll even loop this. Right? I can kind of see a sustained kind of thing going down. So that might work, but I can, let me see if something more percussive will work. It both works, right? Some snappy percussive kind of playing works, some long sustained playing works, right? So, but you can see how it kind of really fills in the middle of the frequency range. I'll kind of demonstrate what I'm talking about here. So if I put in, forgive me, I'm going to put in an audio effect that you're not familiar with, but we'll talk more about this, trust me, at greater length, just to kind of show you the frequency content of this track. So if I turn off, if I just play the bass and I look at the frequencies, it's a bunch of low frequencies, right? If I play the drums, it's all kinds of frequencies, low and high frequencies. If I play the keys, notice if I play low on the keyboard, it's low frequencies, but if I play really high, it's higher frequencies. Right? So this is all to say that a keyboard usually occupies, in the context of playing with a band, a lot of times it occupies the mid-range of the frequencies. But anyway, this is something you could explore with, added a plus here by accident, but we've talked about drums. We've talked about chordal instruments. We've just touched upon bass. You know, you can add a melody, different melodic instruments as well. Effects, we'll talk more about all of this. But I guess what I want to talk about now is a little bit of music theory. We talked a little bit about rhythm, and I want to talk more about that because that's actually a really good thing to talk about. But let's talk a little bit about just some other music theory that you might not be familiar with. I guess before I go on, are there any questions? I hope your brain isn't hurting with too much information.
There were some questions about tempo when you were talking about rhythm, and I just wonder if you wanted to maybe clarify the difference between measures and beats and tempo.
Sure, absolutely. Tempo, if you look at this little button right here, you could actually make the track faster or slower. So right now I'm actually making the track slower. If I make this number 60, what this number means is that there are 60 beats per minute, okay? So that's an interesting number because there's something around you that has that feature, that property, and that's your clock, right? If you see a clock, it ticks exactly, the second hand of a clock ticks exactly 60 times a minute, okay? So this is this is where you set the tempo. So if I slow the tempo down, well, actually, let me turn this back on. That's a slower tempo, but watch what happens as I as I bring this tempo up. But notice how when I do that, the proportions of the beats relative to one another don't change. But basically this is what I'm trying to say. If I go back to Sibelius, maybe this is easier to see on Sibelius and I can jump back. Basically, if I do this, whoops, oh gosh, sorry. What this is saying is basically we are having, oh gosh, sorry. What this is saying is that there are going to be 4 quarter notes per measure. Let me actually change my audio setup so you can actually hear this in case you want to. Okay, you probably can't already hear this. I take it you can hear this, right? What this is saying is that there's going to be 4 quarter notes per measure, right? And that this particular information is saying that there will be 60 quarter notes per minute. Okay? So basically, that's tempo, right? If I change this value to 120, there will still only be 4 quarter notes per measure, but there will be 120 quarter notes per minute played. Okay, but if I change this to like 500, there's still, I mean, basically, what I guess the point I'm trying to make is the number of beats in the measure is still staying consistent. All the subdivisions that are occurring within the measure are all staying consistent. It's just that you're kind of advancing through the piece at a faster rate when you change the tempo, if that makes sense. So for instance, all of these things are the same. Like this is still measure 1, this is still measure 2, this is still measure 3, this is measure 4. The only difference is when I have the tempo really slow, we're advancing through the measures much slower. But if I have the tempo fast, we're advancing through the measures more quickly. So that's what tempo refers to. Okay. Great question. Any other questions? No questions. Okay. Okay, we're going to change gears here a little bit. We've talked about rhythm. I'm going to talk a little bit about pitch, okay?
Nakul, just before you go on, there's a question in the chat about whether you can have different tempos in different sections of a piece in Ableton.
Yes, you can. Yes, that's a good question. I'll save on how to do that for a later time because you certainly can. It actually deals with automation. And that's something that's going to be required for homework 1, but I'll save that topic. That's a perfect thing to talk about. So I'll create a note for myself. Talk about tempo changes via automation. Okay, so I'll discuss that with you guys. It's a great question. Okay, any other questions? Okay. It's good to have a little silence from time to time, just because we're going to change gears a little bit, and so just a minute or so to just catch your breath. Okay, not quite a minute, but let's talk about pitch. And so pitches, so I guess overall in music, One way to think about it is via very basic broad stroke sort of ways. So for instance, I've heard of a teacher describing music in this way, where it's either high, low, fast or slow, loud and soft, earlier and later, and then this thing called timbre. This is a very broad strokes way of describing music that it's kind of a catch-all for a lot of different music traditions around the world. But the specifics are really where things get different. But in general, I think it's kind of important to understand music theory, these aspects of music theory, at least understanding what these things are so that you could start making your music. We've talked about tempo, we've talked about fast, slow, we've talked about rhythm. That's really the earlier, later component, right? Sorry, no. Well, these two things kind of blur together a little bit. There's a little bit of, I just added this one later and maybe I shouldn't have, but basically we've talked about these two components. We haven't really talked about loud versus soft. We've talked about timbre from the standpoint that timbre is really just the different instruments that you use, each one having their own sound. So we've talked about the bass instruments having kind of lower frequencies, the keyboard instruments, prioritizing mid frequencies in certain contexts. But let's talk about pitch, because this is what a lot of music theory spends time talking about. And if you've never taken music theory before, it might be really intimidating. Like, what notes do you use? Okay. So going along with the idea of high and low, pitches can be high or low. So like a flute, we've talked about a flute. We've talked about a bass being lower pitches, but a flute oftentimes plays higher pitches, not always, but they often do. So a piano is interesting from the standpoint that you have a lot of range. You have a lot of lower pitches and you have a lot of higher pitches, right? So on the piano, the lower pitches are towards the left and the higher pitches are towards the right. And I want you to notice something like this pattern that I've boxed for you to see. Notice how all of these boxes look like each other, right? There's a group of 2 and a group of 3. Group of 2, group of 3, group of 2, group of 3, right? This is saying something about how the piano is periodic or how it repeats something, okay? Notice how each of these arrows at the beginning of each of these boxes points to a letter that looks like C, okay? This is C1, this is C2, C3, C4, C5, C6, C7, right? Right? So an important aspect of music theory is that these pitches wrap around. So like you play all the letters of the alphabet, the musical alphabet, you go C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and then it wraps back around. You have C again, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, then it wraps back around. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, right? It keeps wrapping around. So what is the difference between this C and this C? They're the same note, they just sound higher or lower. So these boxes are different octaves, which basically means that all these pitches are the same pitches as these pitches, they just sound higher than these pitches, okay? So for instance, I can demonstrate by playing like Happy Birthday. I don't know, it's statistically, there's a 50% chance that it's someone's birthday today. So if it is your birthday, don't be shy. Like, we need to sing you Happy Birthday. The idea, I guess, is if I play Happy Birthday in a higher octave, it sounds the same as if I play in a lower octave. Whoa, whoa. Right? It sounds the same. Or if I...
We're getting some pitch distortion here.
Yeah, there's some distortion here too. I don't know why that's happening. It's a terrible time to have pitch distortion. Let's see. I'm sorry. I hope it's still a happy birthday after that pitch distortion for those of you who it's their birthday. Like, is it distortion from the standpoint that it's just like the pitches are off pitch?
Yeah. It sounds like you're going down a minor ninth or something rather than an octave.
Yeah. I hear you. So
Apparently it's Keyshawn's birthday, so happy birthday, Keyshawn.
Happy birthday, Keyshawn. Yeah, I'm trying to deliberately like change the key. Like I'm playing different notes. You know what? I'll just play it in Sibelius because Sibelius never let me down. So if I have right those pitches right there, not the correct rhythm, but if I take these same exact notes, I could take these same notes and bring them down an octave. It still sounds like the same melody, right? Oh, whoops, sorry, that's a really fast tempo. That sounds the same, just lower than this, right? So that's all to say that the pitches wrap around. They kind of repeat, but basically all of these boxes represent octaves. And just kind of be aware that on a piano, you're gonna have to kind of know how this layout works because Ableton uses a piano roll. But just know that the notes repeat every octave and that you can easily tell when they repeat by looking at patterns of 2s and 3s. So if you have a pattern of 2 and 3, you've ended the pattern and now it starts over again. 2, 3, 2, 3, right? So one octave of notes looks like this. So like if I take one of these boxes and I just look at one octave, it looks like this. And these are what the note names were called. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. And then depending on which direction you're coming from, you could call this C sharp or D flat, D sharp or E flat. Basically, sharps and flats mean you raise this note or you lower this note. If I raise this note, I haven't talked about half steps, although I do have a slide on it. If you raise this note, it becomes sharp, C sharp. But if you lower this D note, it becomes flat, so D flat. So they're actually the same thing. You can arrive at this note from two different places. You can arrive at it from here, C sharp, or you can arrive at it from here, D flat, okay? The thing to keep in mind is you could take this, in Ableton, it takes the piano and it actually flips it on its side. So instead of the higher notes being on the left and the lower notes being on the left, sorry, instead of the higher pitches being on the right and the lower notes being on the left, in Ableton, it flips it so that the higher notes are at the top and the lower notes are at the bottom. And you know, there's still octaves here. So for instance, I could still draw an octave like this. Give me a second. I could still do something like this. Oh, wait, sorry, give me one sec. Right. This is nice. If I copy this, look at that. It's another octave, right? It's a good day, right? We've got more octaves, right? And you can see how each one of these little boxes represents the same letters, right? Sorry, it's a little messy. It's kind of good that I'm doing this in real time, but it's also, you can see how tedious this can be. But anyway, oh gosh, sorry. Okay, so notice how each one of these boxes has the same letters. It's C, D, E, F, G, A, B. C, D, E, F, G, A, B. Except this is all in this octave. It's in the 6th octave. That's why it's C6, D6, E6, etc. Whereas this box is C5, D5, E5, etc. And this is C4, D4, E4, etc. Right? So in Ableton, this is really important because when you look at the left-hand side of your MIDI editor, when you hover over any note, it actually tells you the note that you're dealing with, okay? So for instance, right here, if I hover over, I created a stupid mouse picture here, but pretend that this is my mouse, and it is, I guess, in this case. If you hover over a note, you will see the pitch and octave of that note on the left. and you will see the piano. You will basically see the piano over here, and the higher notes are up here, and the lower notes are down here. So to kind of show you that one more time, you basically see this like the following. You see the higher notes up here. You see C4, C3, C2, C1, C0. Those are the octaves of C. It's basically, you know how I boxed out those pitches? It's basically boxing out the pitches in the same way. These are the different octaves, okay? This is totally analogous to this. It's like each one of these, notice how it's C7, C6. It starts at C, right? And then if you hover over any note, notice how on the left-hand side it shows you the pitch. So it shows you like G2 or A2 or R2, D2. No, I'm just kidding. It shows you these particular pitches. And that's great, okay? Why is this so great? Well, I'm gonna give you some formulas for good pitches to start with. And a great formula for pitches to use are a scale, okay? So a scale, we've talked about one pitch, like pitches being lower or higher and like what these pitches are, but if you want, you could actually take many pitches, use them in your track, and they sound nice together. And I think that's the goal. It's like hard to find pitches that sound nice together. But let's work this out, okay? So for instance, I'm claiming that for a sad, intense, ruminating type sound, you could choose these notes, which basically are the D minor Dorian scale, okay? So let's input this into the scale editor, okay? So what are the notes? They're D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D. Okay, so I'm gonna hover over, I got a D, E, F, and incidentally, I could do this in any octave I want. G, A, B, C, D, okay? So now, what's interesting about this is that I've got these notes to play with, and I can almost guarantee you that these notes will sound good. I forgot what key this original piece was in. Let me see.
You got a G in the bass there.
Got a G. So let me change this G to a D. Thank you. All right. So
Nicole, just before you go on, Ableton calls what we call we normally call middle C C4, but Ableton calls it C3. So the numbers in Ableton don't exactly correspond. They're displaced by 1, but that doesn't really matter.
Yeah, that is, I always forget that. So thanks for pointing that out. There's a certain specification. Alex is basically saying that there's a certain specification for where middle C is. And I think Ableton calls middle C, the middle C is like basically the C that's in the middle of a piano. And I think Ableton, Alex, you're saying that Ableton calls middle C C3?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I guess that's something good to be aware of in case you're expecting it to sound a certain way. If it sounds too low, you might just bring the notes up an octave. So instead of, I typed in all these notes just now. And let's see, where did I type those notes? Oh, did I just, oh, here we go. Go back to clip view. I typed in these notes. And if this sounds really low, I could always, instead of starting on D1, I could have started on D2. And I could have typed in these notes like this. Now here's a really cool thing. Now you might just want to be in a situation where you just type in notes and you're like, I'm just landing in the scale, but that's not happening right now. But if you press this fold button, aha! So now you're constrained to only entering notes that fit into the D minor scale. So let me actually play this piano part. I have no idea how this is going to sound. Oh, I changed the tempo to something obnoxious. Let me change it back. right? It sounds decent, right? It gives me a good starting point. Now I have very short notes here, but what if I took the notes of the scale and I just played them kind of in order? Right? The reason I'm keeping these notes right here is because I don't need them anymore. But if I unfold it, you have to fold. The way fold works is by basically it basically folds all the notes that aren't actively being used out of sight. They're kind of folded away, if you will. So you have to have the notes laid down. Like for instance, if I didn't have these notes and I folded, nothing would appear here. So I have to basically, I can get rid of these notes now if I want, because I've kind of have the template of notes that I need, and it'll just basically only include these notes in my arrangement. You don't have to fold. You could also look and see at where you are and type in notes. But from a creative standpoint, it might be fun to just like limit yourself to these notes and just like, you know, randomly put some stuff in. Right, you could experiment with that quite haphazardly. I haven't talked about chords yet, but it's sort of a fun way to get started. But it's all predicated on you understanding how to interpret the piano roll, because you have to know, like if you have a formula for a scale, you have to know how to input it into your piano roll. So maybe I will ask, well, I'm sure a lot of you are following along with me right now, I would imagine. If anyone's got a cool workflow, or if there's any questions before I ask that question.
So Nakul, I mean, maybe this is too complicated, but you gave the example of D Dorian as giving a certain mood. Could you give us an idea of like how, you know, maybe changing the bass note to an F and then starting the mode on F might give us a different kind of mood, for example? I don't know.
Sure.
That might be getting too far ahead, but like
well,
using the same notes.
There is, you know, what I might do instead is talk about this, because modes are one way of doing it. Maybe I'll talk about it. We'll talk about another scale, for instance.
Great.
And I'll change my bass note. I'm keeping these deliberately simple. So I'll change this to C. Okay. So, so if you want sort of a happier sound, you could use these notes to start out with. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, right? And so if I do that, this is basically the major scale. I'll create a MIDI clip. So if I want a happier sound, let me change the grid resolution. I'll use the right-click method. I'll go to quarter notes. And I'll type in a C, go to D. In fact, I'll start at a higher octave this time. D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Now listen to how happy this sounds. Let me actually fold this. Right? right? So this gives it, this just by changing the scale, I've got a totally different mood, right? This sounds pretty, this sounds much less intense to me, to my ears at least. So there's a variety of scales that are available to you. And Alex actually suggested reordering the notes. And that's called, what you're doing there is you're actually, you're playing with modes, and we haven't, I guess, maybe I'll save that discussion another day, but I guess really simply, you could, well, I think I'll save that discussion.
No, I mean, all it is really, instead of starting on a D, you're starting on a C. So choosing a different note from the notes that you've already got to start on gives you a whole different mood, right?
That's right. That's right. So let's see. That's exactly right. So I guess it is, sorry, give me one sec. Give me one sec. I had a really good mode thing, but I can't find it. But it is exactly what Alex said. You just start on a different note of the scale. So instead of starting on C, for instance, on the example that we were looking at earlier, whoops, not that. Electronic music. Okay, instead of starting on C, we're going C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. You could just do this, right? You're kind of offsetting it, right? So by doing so, you get a different sound. There's like all kinds of possibilities baked into rearranging this particular scale. So for instance, if I rearrange this one more time, we can take a listen to how this sounds. You have a whole gamut of possibilities here. So for instance, for example, I'll turn off the bass track for a second. I've got C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. And instead of starting on C, if I just start on D, and I just keep climbing up, right? What you have is you're basically using the same pitches you had before, but you're just starting on a different note. So instead of starting on D, I could start on E, and it would have a different sound. Instead of starting on E, I could start on F, and it would have a different sound. If I start on A, I'll have more of a sad sound. A little hard to hear in this context, but you can basically explore the different moods by exploring the different modes. There's a lot of stuff to say about that, but it's really simple on the face of it. Now, there's more stuff I want to say, but I guess again, I just don't want to go too fast. So if there's any questions about any of this stuff, please pipe in. I was going to talk about chords and triads.
I have a question.
Sure.
So can you explain again what is the difference between half notes and the full note? Yeah.
Sure. Basically, the difference between a half note and a whole note is two half notes fit into the same amount of time as one whole note. So a half note is basically half the duration of a whole note. That's why it's called a half note. So for instance, in the same unit of time, if I was in a whole note grid, right? So I'm going to go to whole note grid. Right here, this is an entire whole note, okay? But if I switch to a half note grid, 2 half notes fit into the same exact time as 1 whole note.
Okay, that makes sense.
Cool. Keep the questions coming, guys. Any other questions? I'm reluctant to teach you anymore. I wanted to talk about triads. I guess you could look at this section if you want to, but I'm a little reluctant to kind of go over this right now because I don't want your brain to explode with information. So maybe I'll just kind of quiz you on some stuff really quickly. Okay, so what view am I hovering over right now?
The arrangement view?
The arrangement view, okay. Right here, I've got this type of data where it's not like a waveform. What kind of data is this data? MIDI data, okay? What if I go to this view right here? What is this view called? It's not clip view. This is clip view.
Device.
Device view, okay? Very good. What if I'm in arrangement view and I accidentally go to this view? What is this view? Incidentally, the answers are they're all available. You can cheat by looking at the help on the bottom left. Ooh, it disappears right when I go there. This is session view. And if I didn't know that, I could always go jump over to info view, exactly. Okay, so these views are helpful. Incidentally, if I want to create some new instruments, new sounds, what could I use? What view could I use?
The browser?
The browser view, okay? Very, very basic stuff, but really important to know. If I wanted to create a new track, what would I do?
You could right click or you could use one of the keyboard shortcuts to create a new track.
Ooh, right click. I didn't even realize, I kind of forgot that you could do that. Yes, you could right click right here and click insert audio track or MIDI track. You could use one of the keyboard shortcuts. And I guess the most straightforward way without using shortcuts is just by going to create insert audio track or insert MIDI track, right? So let's say I have a MIDI track. I'll create a MIDI track. What if I want to create a clip from measure 2 to measure 3? Okay, tell me when to stop, okay? All right, I want everyone to collectively stop me when I get to measure 2.
Stop.
Okay, okay, good. All right. All right, I'm gonna keep going until I get to measure 3. Tell me when to stop.
Stop.
Okay, all right. Yeah, it was inevitable. It was gonna happen. All right. So what if I want to create an a MIDI clip for this particular region? What should I do? Anyone?
You right click and then you put insert MIDI, right? Or...
Yes, absolutely. All right, so I right clicked, click insert MIDI clip, and we are ready to go. Now I've got all this piano roll right here. Interesting. Okay, one little quick fact before you go. If you were putting in notes and you can't hear stuff, make sure you click this little MIDI editor preview so you can hear what you're playing as you're typing it. That is, I think, enough for today. But yeah, hopefully your heads haven't. Hopefully your mind is blown more than you're completely saturated. So yeah, just if you have any questions, just please let me know. Let the TAs know. We could pace accordingly. And I'll add more information on rhythm. I'll add some information on modes and all this stuff. And I also made a note to talk about tempo changes next class. So yeah, I hope you guys are all having fun. And if there's any questions, I'm gonna be hanging out here for the time being to address any and all questions that I'll hopefully be able to answer.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Nakul.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
I have
Thank you.
I have a quick question, just a quick one, real quick.
Oh yeah. It doesn't even have to be
Yeah,
quick.
so I think we had a discussion like on Tuesday, I think.
About what?
Like a Zoom discussion on Tuesday, but like I didn't receive a link until like yesterday to like get into this one, and I think I missed like a lot of like key components that you guys went over.
Okay, so what you want to do is you want to go to I put all the videos on YouTube, and there was a little bit of a
Yeah.
delay on the last YouTube video, so I apologize. But if you
No,
just,
you're good.
if you click, sometimes YouTube like removes my video or it does something weird, but it's here. So last class was there. This class is here.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, and then I'll add today's class very shortly.
So at this point, we don't really have like that much information to complete the first homework assignment, right?
There's actually, you guys, I think there's enough information to complete half of the homework assignment.
Oh, okay.
Just, we haven't talked about how to export and to do all that stuff. But yeah, if you watch the last lecture, I think you'll get up to speed quite quickly on a lot of stuff. And then the sections themselves will keep reiterating this kind of stuff. I think they're really tailoring themselves to
Yeah.
the assignment.
Yeah. All right. Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Someone asked if you had a discussion tomorrow.
Oh, I'm not even showing my video. Have I not been showing my video the whole time?
No.
Yeah, we
Oh.
haven't seen you at all.
Oh man, I wish someone told me. All right, so let me. Okay, here we go. Sorry, guys. All right. Yeah, here I am. So.
I have a question.
Yes.
So is this class part of a series, or are we going to be like fluent in Ableton like by the end of the class?
Okay, so there is a class that's more traditionally teaches Ableton, Music 173. There's talks about making a second part to that class, but it hasn't happened. It seems like a lot of classes around UCSD are kind of going in a direction where they're incorporating more more software into their curriculum. So by no means will you be expected to be an expert in Ableton by the end of this quarter. There's just too much stuff to cover. But you will become fluent in a lot of the basics, for sure.
So if there's like a part 2 to this class, what class would it be called? Or what class should we look out for?
If you want to learn more about Ableton, I would look into Music 173. There's going to be a lot of overlap, to be honest. That's just kind of the nature of how it worked out this quarter, but everyone teaches it slightly differently. The kind of creative impulses that everyone has are different. So it's, you'll learn a lot. I highly recommend you take 173 with King Britt. He teaches an incredible, he's an incredible teacher, incredible musician, really nice person. So I would highly recommend you take that class if you're interested in continuing learning about Ableton.
Thank you.
Of course.
I have a question. If we go back to the Ableton.
Oh, sure.
So is A sharp? Let's look at A sharp 3. Is it basically the same note as B3?
Oh, I'm sorry. You're cutting in and out a little bit. Can you say that again?
Oh yeah. Is A sharp 3 the same as B3?
A sharp 3.
No.
The same? No, it's not.
So, because you mentioned that you can get from A sharp or from any sharp to the same note basically without using the.
Well, it's not true for, well, it gets a little complicated, but I guess the black keynotes, you can easily you can get to them coming from both directions. So it's the black keys that more commonly are named in both ways. So for instance, A sharp can be called B flat.
Okay.
But you could, for
They,
instance,
they sound different though, right?
No, they sound exactly the same. At least on a piano, they do. Yes, it gets complicated because you could have different intonation systems, and but on a piano, it uses equal temper tuning. So A sharp and B flat sound the same. But they're, you know.
It's a complicated question.
Yeah. I'm new, so I'm not even a music major at all. It's actually my last quarter graduating, but I thought I would take a music class for fun.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think it'll be fun. There's always, even if a lot of the stuff is I've done before, but it's still just fun to re-examine the most basic of concepts. Because even something like a sharp and a flat, are they the same thing? There's a lot to, I think I got grilled on accidentally thinking that at one point, but there's a lot of, there's just always more to learn. So it's an exciting.
All right, thank you.
Nakul, I wonder even if, sorry, Finn, you had a question, but I wonder if like sticking to just the white notes might be something that could give those who need a limited framework something to like work within.
No, I think so. I mean, that was the rationale behind
the modes.
Just choosing the scales and modes that only had white keys. But inevitably, like, I think someone's going to run into it. So I agree. Like, I think that you can get a lot of mileage out of just using the white keys. And there are, as we talk more about the different Ableton effects, there's actually like a cool Ableton device that constrains notes to only be the white keys. So if you do end up typing black keys, it'll shift them into their neighboring white key. And I think that is useful because it's kind of like when you get into chromaticism, there's a whole swath of stuff that you can stub your toe on, and it gets really advanced really quickly. So I totally agree. In fact, with the triads discussion, it just discusses like basically the white key triads of like the D, Dorian mode. But yeah, because Ableton allows you to transpose stuff using a transpose device. So it's like, what's the point of learning how to do stuff in a complicated key if you can just do it in a alphabetically simple key and just transpose it using Ableton's magic.
I have a question.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah, so I make a product like a few days ago after I reading the assignment. So can I show you my project to let you see is anything you want from me?
Yeah, let me